breaking news.
I want to welcome our viewers watching the United States and around the world right now on CNN International. I'm Anderson Cooper live from Jerusalem. Breaking news, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is set to start right now. Just hours after fighting between Israel and Hamas hit the heart of Tel Aviv, we're waiting to see what this hour will bring. We have reporters on both sides of this border. Both sides have been firing rockets at each other right up until now. We'll have live reports from Gaza and Ashkelon, Israel in moments. Yesterday, around this time, reporting on hopes for a break in cross-border rocket attacks, what a senior Hamas official described to CNN as a calming down period. But even as diplomats, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, searched for a truce, the fighting last night intensified. Israel trained rockets and artillery fire in Gaza overnight. 100 confirmed strikes, destroyed bridges, tunnels, and buildings. Hamas returned fire with dozens of rockets, 62 according to Israeli Defense Forces. About a third were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. This attack, a bomb, a public bus around lunchtime, not far from Israel's military headquarters. The blast wounded 24 people, added a new urgency to efforts to reach a ceasefire. The military wing of Hamas tweeted to Israelis, quote, "You opened the gates of hell on yourselves." About 40 minutes after the bus bombing, our cameras captured this explosion in Gaza City. All the while, there was a flurry of diplomatic activity. Secretary Clinton met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank and with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. Then she headed to Cairo to meet with Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi. Then about 90 minutes, Egypt's foreign minister with Secretary Clinton at his side. Let's go straight to Fred Pleighton, who's live in Ashkelon, Israel, where sirens have been going off earlier. Also joining us is Ben Wiedemann in the Gaza Strip in Gaza City. Fred, what are you seeing right now in Ashkelon? Fred Pleighton, have the rockets stopped in Ashkelon?
Oh, the rockets, yeah, Anderson, the rockets have stopped in Ashkelon. It was actually quite interesting because up until about, I would say about a minute before our broadcast began, there were still booms that were heard in the sky. And about 10 minutes ago, we actually had to run for cover here in Ashkelon. Now, however, it appears as though things are quiet. But I can tell you from speaking to people here on the ground, they're telling us they don't really believe in this ceasefire just yet at this point in time. Folks that we're speaking to at this cafe who have actually been watching the speech of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just a couple of minutes ago say that they believe that this is not a solution to the problem, that quite possibly they are going to be having to face rockets falling on their heads very soon again, Anderson.
I'm also joined here in Jerusalem with CNN's Wolf Blitzer. We're both going to be monitoring developments over this crucial next hour. This next hour really key to what happens for the next 24 to 48 hours. Ben Wiedemann is also joining us in Gaza City. Ben, from what you're seeing, what you're hearing, any incoming, any outgoing?
Well, certainly within the last half hour to 40 minutes, there was quite a lot of both. We saw 3 separate volleys of rockets fired from the area just behind me, and just about 7 or 8 minutes ago, heard the sort of incoming rounds landing, also just not far from here. Now it has gone quiet. We can still hear the drones overhead, but certainly it did seem that both sides were trying to get in their last knocks before the clock struck 9. Anderson?
Ben, it's important for people to realize Hamas is not the only actor in Gaza which has been firing rockets. There's also Islamic Jihad and other groups. What is the likelihood that Hamas will be able to stop other groups from any form of aggression? Because as part of this ceasefire agreement, they are responsible for a cessation, a stopping of all aggression toward Israel by all factions.
No way. Okay, Henderson, I just heard a large explosion in the distance. As far as that goes, certainly Hamas, as far as Israel considers Hamas to be the government in Gaza, they don't recognize it, but they consider it responsible every time a rocket is fired out, every time there's some sort of disturbance of the peace, so to speak. So they will be obliged to some extent to try to stop other groups like Islamic Jihad, like smaller organizations from breaking the ceasefire. And Hamas has really gained a lot out of this war. You have to remember that back in January 2006, when Hamas won the parliamentary elections, the Palestinian parliamentary elections, the United States and Israel immediately took steps to isolate it politically, economically, in every possible way. Now we find that Hamas has hosted leaders from Turkey, from Egypt, from Qatar, foreign ministers from a variety of Arab countries. It's gained quite a lot in the last 8 days, and some people here would say it would be foolhardy for them to lose their gains simply because some small faction decides to launch a rocket over the border. Anderson?
And you're looking at a live picture on the right-hand side of your screen of Gaza City. And I want to keep that picture up as we continue our discussion to see if there are any more incoming shells from Israeli Defense Forces, any outgoing rockets from factions, from Hamas and other factions inside Gaza. Joined also by Wolf Blitzer here in our studio in Jerusalem. You just spoke to Mark Regev, the spokesman for the foreign ministry, for the prime minister. You asked him some key questions, and for some there were not answers. In particular, what happens to the borders, to the blockade of Gaza City?
I think that'll depend if this thing holds. If the rockets no longer go into Israel, if there's no firing at Israeli troops who are patrolling the border, if that stops, I think the Israelis are prepared to take some steps to ease some of those blockades, some of those restrictions, but that's going to take a while. That's not going to go into, I suspect that's not going to go into effect right away. The Israelis want to test Hamas right now. They want to test this agreement, see what happens over them, not just the next few hours, but the next few days, see what's happening, and then they'll begin to reciprocate, I suspect, but I don't think they're going to do much right away.
But he also made clear that the Israeli government holds Hamas responsible for all the factions, Islamic Jihad, any other Al-Qaeda-related groups, anybody who's firing rockets against
Israel. And that's a problem, as you were just there, Anderson. You know that Hamas may not be able to control every element, every disparate terrorist organization that may be operating there, and they could sabotage it if they get an opportunity. Some of them might want to do that. So we'll see. I think there is a good relationship between the Hamas leadership and the Egyptian government of the new president, Mohamed Morsi, who himself is a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a whole new regime in Egypt right now. And what's intriguing is not only the U.S. administration of President Obama, but the Israelis. They went out of their way to praise President Morsi for his role right now. So potentially there could be an improvement in Israeli-Egyptian relations if this agreement holds. That's obviously a big hold. A big if right now. We're going to see what happens in the coming hours. We're watching it closely.
And Ben Wiedemann, Egypt has a role in basically monitoring developments and has a responsibility now, according to this agreement, at the parameters of the ceasefire. Egypt, will they be able to stop smuggling of Hamas weapons through those tunnels from Egypt into Gaza City? Because there's a lot of concern, obviously, on the Israeli side of the border that Hamas will simply use any kind of a ceasefire, use any stopping of violence to basically replenish their stockpile of weapons.
It really is up to the political will of the Egyptian leadership to make sure this happens. We've seen it in the past that the Egyptians will sort of tighten and loosen their hold on Gaza when they see fit, when there are tensions, for instance, in the days of Hosni Mubarak, when there were tensions between Hamas and the Egyptian government. Suddenly it became very difficult for Palestinians in Gaza to leave the Gaza Strip and go through Egypt. Sometimes they would decide to crack down on the tunnels. After the last flare-up, the Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009, part of the agreement when the fighting ended was that the Americans would provide money to the Egyptian government to build an underground wall, steel wall, to prevent tunnels from being dug. What happened is the Gazan tunnel diggers are very good at what they did, and they were able to basically knock holes in that wall. So the Egyptian government is going to have to really sort of redouble its efforts to make sure that, A, there's no smuggling out of Gaza into Gaza of weapons, weapons, and B, that they have an eye on what's going in and out. And certainly, if they take a passive approach, if they don't do that, then it will be very much a repeat of what we've seen in the past. A lot of weapons getting into Gaza, and others as well, people as well. You have to remember also that the Sinai, which since the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, since the revolution in Egypt, has become something of the wild, wild east for the country. Thousands of prisoners escaped during the revolution, found their way in the Sinai. So Egypt has a double problem. It has to reestablish its control over Sinai if it's going to have any effect on arms smuggling into Gaza. Anderson?
It's Wolf over here, Ben. It was intriguing to me, Anderson, and I think it's intriguing to a lot of people, the U.S. role in all of this, because we know in the statement that the White House released, the readout, if you will, of the president's conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He promised there would be additional financial assistance to Israel in connection with that Iron Dome anti-missile system. There were political assurances provided to the Israelis as well that the U.S. would support Israel as a result of of this agreement, that Israel has a right to defend itself. But I'm intrigued also by what the U.S. promised Egypt right now, because I'm sure there were some significant assurances, not only economic, financial, military, political assurances to the new government in Egypt as well.
Ben Wiedemann, and again, we're monitoring developments. If you're just joining us in Gaza City, we're keeping up our live camera picture there, as Ben Wiedemann is also there in Gaza City to see if this ceasefire is holding. Now just a few minutes old, if there are any rockets outgoing, any more explosions incoming. And Ben, if you hear anything, obviously let us know. There are critics of this agreement already who are saying, look, this is just a return to the status quo that existed before this latest flare-up of the conflict began some 8 or 9 days ago. How will anything be different? Within 24 hours of this ceasefire, the borders are supposed to reopen to the way they were before, but there is still essentially a blockade in effect, no?
The blockade, as far as the border with Israel is concerned, is not going to change. That's really not in the cards. I think what Hamas wants is much freer movement in and out of Gaza through Egypt. And beyond that, what they're looking is the ability for Palestinians here in Gaza to travel in and out, because that's one of the main complaints you hear about from Palestinians here, is they feel deprived of the ability to get out of Gaza, to get an education, to